Senator Cruz, thank you for being in focus today. I want to start with what Benjamin Hall was just reporting about the perspective of the people on the ground in Ukraine, maybe seeing President Biden take more of a victory lap, something accomplished that hasn't been yet. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I agree very much with the sentiments being expressed. You know, the State of the Union speech last night, I thought was incredibly disconnected and out of touch. And Biden referenced a number of the challenges in this country, but he took no responsibility for any of them. He talked about inflation. He didn't acknowledge the trillions in new spending and debt that's driving inflation. He talked about gas prices going up. He didn't acknowledge his policies that are destroying the domestic energy market. And when it came to Ukraine, he didn't acknowledge the direct responsibility he bears for the Russian invasion of Ukraine because of two things. Number one, last year, the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, the surrender to the Taliban. Every enemy of America took the measure of the man in the Oval Office, and they determined, unfortunately, that the president was weak and feckless and ineffective. And that's a big part of the reason Russia invaded Ukraine. But secondly, Joe Biden specifically made a series of concessions to Putin and Russia, most notably waiving sanctions on Nord Stream 2, the pipeline that Putin was building to go around Ukraine to enable the invasion of Ukraine. I authored those sanctions in the Senate, passed them into law. Donald Trump signed them into law, and it stopped Nord Stream 2 until Joe Biden came into office, surrendered to Putin, gave him the pipeline, and caused the invasion. Biden admits no responsibility for anything. And, you know, the sentiments that were just expressed a second ago, I very much agree. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and this administration are resigned to Putin winning. There's no resolve to win. There's no focus on how do we stop Putin from taking over and conquering Ukraine. And the way we do so is twofold. Number one, we use economic power, massive economic sanctions. Biden has exempted, as you noted, energy. He's exempted oil and gas. Right. Oil and gas is where where Putin gets all of his revenue. We need to be boycotting Russian energy and leading the world in a boycott of Russian energy to cut off the cash to Putin. And number two, we need to be doing much more to provide military aid to Ukraine. Not American soldiers. American soldiers should not be fighting the Russians, but we ought to be providing Stingers and Javelins because the Ukrainians are heroically defending their own homeland.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking with people here in this hour on the ground there, that they're out of guns and those things. I want to just visit a couple of things that you said, because it is just soul-jarring if any of that part has evidence that this administration would be accepting a victory already by Putin. Yeah. It is that is unfathomable. We don't have the right to write history for them. But certainly with as many Americans and people around the world who are professing their love and solidified with Ukraine and its fight for freedom, it is way too early in history to try to do that. I mean, we don't know what we're capable of until we lean in. And here's my question for you, Senator. Putin did this no matter what anyone would have done. How do we know? Because very shortly after Afghanistan, troops were massing. Just in October, we left late August, early September. So just weeks later, he was already putting now up to 200,000 troops on the ground along borders with Ukraine. So he was going to do this. How do we stop him from his next move if we don't show that we might use might? And I am not advocating in any way. No one wants nuclear war, but he's already said he's willing to go there.
So let me take that in two pieces. It's important that we remember what America's interest is in Ukraine. You know, sometimes there are Republicans who talk about Ukraine and they talk about the need to defend democracy, to defend global norms. Frankly, I think that's all gobbledygook. The objective of U.S. foreign policy, the job of the military, is to defend American national security. And the reason we have an acute interest in what Putin is doing is because Putin has told us his objective, which is to reassemble the old Soviet Union. When we were in the Cold War with two superpowers, America and the Soviet Union, it was profoundly dangerous for America. Americans were in greater jeopardy when the Soviet Union was a strong enemy. Putin is trying to rebuild the Soviet Union. Actually, the speech he gave a week ago, he said he wanted to rebuild the Russian Empire of 1922.
Yes.
It is in our interest to keep our enemies weak. We don't want a stronger Vladimir Putin with desires to conquer Europe and conquer the world. That's why we have a strong interest in preventing him from getting stronger, because it's more dangerous for us. You know, the second point you made, respectfully, I don't think it's right that this was inevitable. I think this was preventable. It's the most frustrating aspect about it, is I think Joe Biden made specific mistakes that caused this invasion. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we had a classified briefing with all 100 senators. And one of the Democratic senators stood up and asked the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, said, why did Putin not invade Ukraine in 2017 or in 2018 or 2019 or 2020? And I got to admit, Harris, I and several other senators began laughing, because the answer is obvious, which is that Putin only respects strength. And he believed President Trump was strong. He didn't want to risk the consequences. And critically, Trump had signed into law the sanctions that I authored shutting down Nord Stream 2, which means if Putin invaded Ukraine, he risked jeopardizing the pipelines that go through Ukraine. And without those pipelines, Putin can't get his gas to Europe. It's why Nord Stream 2 was so important. And when Biden came in, he just surrendered Nord Stream 2 to Putin. He waived the sanctions formally. And he did so because this president, this administration believes when you're facing an enemy, you should show weakness. You should show appeasement. They think that's how you stop aggression. That's what they did with the Taliban. That's what they did with Russia. That's what they're doing with China. That's what they're doing with Iran, trying to give Iran hundreds of billions of dollars, which will only allow the Ayatollah to get a nuclear weapon. And appeasement doesn't work. It's more dangerous.
Your description of why Ukraine is important to Americans, to why we are being told to sacrifice with the gas prices now pushed higher than they were already with the inflationary disaster that we were having before the end of 2021. That explanation was missing from the president's address, quite frankly, last night. And people who were listening to put those puzzle pieces together didn't get that. You've done some of that today, and it's tremendously helpful. And I know that there's some politics mixed in too, but you have given a primer on what we are about and what our foreign policy is about with regard to that. Great. I hope people are paying attention.
Thank you,
Senator Cruz, thank you very much for your time.